Today, we're doing a deep dive into Luke chapter 14.
Yeah, a really packed chapter.
Our mission to pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising nuggets hidden in there.
Help you see what's really crucial in this section.
Exactly. Let's get right to it.
Okay. So this chapter, it really moves through some distinct moments, doesn't it? Teachings that challenge how people normally think.
Absolutely. And it kicks off in a very specific kind of charged setting.
Mm-hmm. And Jesus is at a dinner party?
Right, at the house of a prominent Pharisee,
Mm-hmm.
one of the top religious experts.
And the text points out everyone is watching him carefully.
That immediately feels like a test, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
The atmosphere is tense.
And right there, in the middle of this tense situation, is a man with dropsy.
A condition, causing severe swelling. And remember, this is happening on the Sabbath.
Their sacred day of rest, with all these strict rules about what you can and can't do.
You can just feel that tension building. What's Jesus going to do?
And Jesus, well, he doesn't shy away from it. He confronts it head on. He turns to the experts, the ones watching him, and asks them directly.
Point blank. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?
And what's their response?
Silence. The text says they remain silent. They just won't answer.
They won't commit right there in that moment.
Exactly. So in their silence, Jesus acts.
He takes hold of the man, heals him, just like that, and sends him away.
His action is loud against their quiet, maybe calculating silence.
And then he pushes them even more. He gives them an analogy they'd understand.
Something practical from their own lives.
He asks them essentially, look, if one of you has a son, or even an ox, that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, won't you pull him out immediately?
Because, well, that's an emergency, right? Common sense says you act.
Of course, the immediate need overrides the rule in that case. Anyone would do it.
And again, what do they say?
Nothing. Still silent. They're completely stuck.
So what's the key thing here? What's this showing us?
Well, it starkly highlights this tension, doesn't it? Between rigid religious rules and just basic human need, compassion right in front of you.
Their silence feels significant, like they're caught.
Caught between their interpretation of the law and the undeniable reality of someone's suffering. And they can't or won't reconcile it.
It really makes you ask, are the rules meant to help people, or are people just meant to serve the rules no matter what?
A fundamental question raised right at the start.
Okay, let's shift a bit, but we're still at the same dinner. Jesus is now watching the other guests.
Right. He's observing the social dynamics playing out.
He notices them, trying to get the best seats, the places of honor near the host.
That kind of jockeying for position. And he uses this observation for another teaching.
A teaching about humility and honor. And it's really counterintuitive.
Completely against the grain of how we usually think about getting ahead, isn't it?
Totally. He says, look, when you get invited somewhere important, don't immediately grab the best seat.
And he gives a practical reason why not.
Yeah, because someone more important, more distinguished might arrive later.
And then the host might have to come over and say, excuse me, could you move down to the lowest place, maybe?
In front of everyone. That would be, well, humiliating.
So his strategy is the exact opposite.
When you arrive, choose the lowest place. Sit down there first.
And the surprising outcome might be that the host sees you there.
And comes over and says, friend, move up higher.
And suddenly you're honored. But it's an honor given to you by the host publicly, not something you claimed yourself.
Right. And then he states the principle behind it explicitly.
For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted.
It just flips the whole idea of social climbing on its head.
It really does. It suggests the path down, choosing humility, is actually the way to be genuinely lifted up. But that lifting comes from outside yourself.
Not from grabbing the spotlight. That's a powerful nugget right there.
Challenges our whole instinct for self-promotion, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so building on this, who belongs at the table? Jesus then turns to the person who actually invited him.
Right. He speaks directly to his host now.
And he challenges the standard thinking about guest lists for parties.
He says, essentially, when you throw a dinner or a banquet, don't just invite your friends, your family, your relatives, or your rich neighbors.
And why not? He gives the reason.
Because they can invite you back. It's reciprocal.
Which frames it less as pure generosity and more like, well, a social transaction, doesn't it?
Exactly. You're investing in relationships that are expected to pay you back somehow. Networking, maybe.
So Jesus proposes a completely radical alternative guest list.
He says, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind.
Now, it's a guest list you wouldn't normally expect.
These are people defined by their inability to repay you in that social currency. They can't host you back at a fancy dinner. They can't boost your status.
But what's the reward then, if it's not getting paid back socially?
He says, you will be blessed, and the repayment isn't from them.
But it comes later.
Yes, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous.
Wow. Okay, so that draws a sharp contrast. Generosity based on social obligation versus generosity to those who can give nothing back in return.
And the blessing, the real reward, comes from a completely different source at a different time. It reframes what true blessing even means.
Shifts the focus from what's in it for me to who genuinely needs this, trusting the ultimate reward comes from God.
Precisely. It's about the motive behind the giving.
And this idea of a future feast, this resurrection, seems to lead right into the next major teaching, doesn't it? The parable of the great banquet.
It does. Someone at the table hears this talk and says, "Blessed is the man who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God."
Kind of an enthusiastic, maybe pious comment.
And Jesus responds with this parable.
The setup seems simple enough. A man prepares a huge, great banquet, sends out invitations well in advance.
Right. Standard procedure for a big event. Everything's prepared.
So when the time finally arrives, he sends his servant out. The message is simple. Come, for everything is now ready.
You'd expect people to be thrilled, right? Ready to drop everything and go.
But the response is, well, shocking, really. They all start making excuses. Every single one.
And the excuses themselves are interesting. They sound almost mundane, normal life stuff.
Exactly. One says, oh, I just bought a field, I have to go see it.
Another says, I bought 5 yoke of oxen, I need to go try them out.
And a third says, I just got married, so I cannot come.
I mean, buying property, checking investments, getting married, these are significant life events. They sound reasonable on the surface.
But in the context of this huge, prepared, urgent invitation, they function as refusals.
Maybe the surprising point here is how easily seemingly legitimate worldly priorities can become barriers, excuses, when faced with a divine call.
And the master of the banquet, how does he react?
He's angry, understandably. All this preparation and the invited guests just blow it off.
So he gives new orders to his servant, quick ones.
Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town.
And bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.
Hey, there are those groups again. The same ones Jesus just told the host to invite to his party.
Exactly. The outcasts, the marginalized, they become the replacement guests.
So the servant does this, goes and gathers them, but he comes back and reports.
There is still room. The banquet hall isn't full yet.
So the master gives an even more dramatic command.
Go out further.
Yeah, go out to the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in. The language is stronger now. Make them come in.
So that my house will be full. He's determined to have a full house for his feast.
And the final word on the original guests, the ones who made excuses.
It's harsh. Not one of those men who were invited will get a taste of my banquet.
Wow. So this parable, it's exploring so much the nature of God's invitation, maybe?
So surprising ways people refuse it, even with seemingly good reasons.
And the master's determination to fill his kingdom anyway, reaching out to those nobody expected.
It really pushes you to think about your own response to significant invitations in life, doesn't it? What excuses do we make?
Definitely. Okay, so shifting from the dinner table and parables.
Jesus is now out, traveling, and there are huge crowds following him.
And he turns to these crowds and he speaks very starkly, very directly about what it costs to be his follower.
This is where the language gets really challenging for many people.
It is. He says, if anyone comes to him and doesn't hate his father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters.
Yes, and even his own life.
That person cannot be his disciple.
Okay, we really need to unpack that word hate here. It sounds so extreme.
It does. But given the context, especially being paired with giving up everything else.
Right. It seems less about emotional hostility and more about priorities, supreme allegiance.
Exactly. It seems to mean prioritizing Jesus so absolutely, so completely, that by comparison, all other loyalties, even to family or self-preservation, must take second place. They look like hate in comparison to that ultimate commitment.
Putting Jesus first above absolutely everyone and everything. No exceptions.
That seems to be the force of it. And he adds another requirement right after.
Anyone who doesn't carry his cross and follow him
cannot be his disciple.
And that's not about, wearing a cross necklace.
No, it's about accepting potential suffering rejection, difficulty, even death for the sake of following him, bearing a real burden.
It's a serious, heavy commitment he's describing.
And to make sure they understand just how serious, he uses two analogies, practical ones about counting the cost before you start something.
The first one is about building a tower.
Right. Before you lay the first stone, you sit down, you calculate the expense. Do I have enough money, enough resources to actually finish this thing?
Because if you start, lay the foundation, and then run out of funds.
Everyone who sees your unfinished tower will ridicule you. They'll say, this guy started something he couldn't finish.
It's about planning and realistic assessment of the cost versus your resources.
Then the second analogy is a king going to war.
If he knows he has, say, 10,000 soldiers, and the enemy king is coming against him with 20,000.
He has to sit down first and consider, am I strong enough to win this battle?
And if the answer is no,
Then the sensible thing to do is, while the enemy is still a long way off, send a delegation and ask for terms of peace. Don't just rush into a fight you can't win.
both analogies stress careful consideration of the cost and commitment before you jump in.
And the conclusion Jesus draws from this for discipleship is incredibly direct.
In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple.
It's that radical all or nothing call again. Give up everything.
It's not presented as an optional extra for the super committed. It's the baseline requirement.
Yeah, it really drives home the total nature of the commitment being asked for here. You have to count the cost, understand what everything means, and be willing to pay it.
It makes you ask, what does counting the cost truly involve for something this immense?
Yeah.
And what does giving up everything even look like?
Deep questions. And then right after these demanding words, he gives one final short analogy.
About salt, he just states, salt is good.
Simple statement, salt is valuable, right? It preserves, it adds flavor, it's essential in many ways.
It has a purpose. Its defining quality is its saltiness.
But then comes the warning. If the salt loses its saltiness, if it loses that essential quality,
It becomes useless, good for nothing.
the text is quite blunt. Fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It just gets thrown out.
Wow, that's a harsh end for something that was good.
And then the final command for the chapter. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Pay attention to this.
So how does this salt analogy connect back? Especially after the talk about discipleship, what's the saltiness?
Well, given the context of the radical commitment, the distinct priorities, bearing the cross, giving up everything, the saltiness seems to represent that essential quality, that distinctive nature and effectiveness that a disciple is supposed to have.
The thing that makes them different, useful for God's purposes.
Exactly. It connects back to being set apart, being willing to live differently based on that supreme allegiance.
And if that quality is lost, if the commitment fades, if the disciple becomes indistinguishable from the world around them,
The implication is severe. They become useless, ineffective, like salt that's lost its flavor, fit only to be discarded. It's a final sharp warning about maintaining the core integrity of that commitment.
wow. So just wrapping up this one chapter, Luke 14, it's an incredible journey.
It really is. From challenging religious hypocrisy about the Sabbath,
To that upside-down wisdom about humility leading to honor.
then the radical call to generosity towards those who can't repay,
Through that powerful parable about the great banquet, the excuses, and the unexpected guests.
culminating in that incredibly demanding picture of discipleship, counting the cost, giving up everything.
And ending with that stark warning about losing your saltiness, your essential purpose.
It's a constant challenge to conventional thinking, pushing for a completely different perspective on life, faith, and commitment.
It absolutely leaves you with a lot to chew on. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, drawn from this chapter. What does it truly mean for you to count the cost of something you deeply value? Maybe it's discipleship as described here. Maybe it's a career goal, a relationship, a core principle you want to live by. What are the full costs, the hidden costs maybe, that we often fail to properly estimate when we first commit to something important?